So in an earlier segment, we showed how to check brake adjustment on the turnbuckles using a go, no-go gauge. In the example we used earlier, the equalizer band was level, which is great first check. The second check then showed that the go, no-go gauge tool actually had too much clearance, which means the bands were too tight and needed to be loosened. So to adjust the brake bands, you want to make the same change on the left as on the right. Loosen the lock nuts. In this case, a quarter of a turn loosens the band. You would do the same quarter of a turn on the other side to make sure the adjustment remains equal on the left and the right. Continue this adjustment process until the go, no-go gauge fits as it needs to. Then simply resecure the jam nuts. At that time, your bands are set properly and your equalizer is set properly. Now all that's left in readjusting the brakes is ensure that your band retractors are adjusted properly as well. So now that you have your equalizer, turnbuckles, and bands adjusted properly, the next step is to ensure that these brake retractor arms are adjusted properly as well. These are important in the brake system because they ensure that as the band unwinds, as you raise the brake handle, the band comes off of the flange evenly around and doesn't try to drag. These are very simple to adjust. This is a single bolt. Loosen the bolt. You can use your go, no-go gauge again to ensure that it slides up in there. Again, it's about a 3/16 of an inch is what you're looking for all the way around. This case, it's adjusted just the way it needs to be. You would tighten this bolt down. You would repeat this for every one of the retractors on each side. So now with the brake retainers set, we need to make sure that the springs are set right as well. Springs are very important because they do two things. One, as you raise the brake handle, it ensures that the band unwinds properly from the drum. But if they're not adjusted properly, they're either going to cause the bands to chatter, which is a problem and will cause premature brake wear, or if they're too tight, they will cause the brake bands to kick. In most cases, when we see complaints of kicking brakes, we come and find that this spring has been tightened too much. And we'll demonstrate on the brake handle how to determine if it has the right amount of tension in the spring. So we talked about getting the springs properly tensioned to make sure the brake handle operates like it should. If the springs are too tight, the brake handle will kick. If the springs are too loose, the brakes will actually chatter and cause premature brake wear. The simplest way to tell if they're in proper adjustment is by brake feel. Now, this needs to be done without the linkage for the upper operator's console if your rig has one. If your rig doesn't have one, don't worry about that. But you don't want this linkage on there as it affects the way the brakes feel. So going back to your brake handle, to know if it's in proper tension, you don't want the brake handle to rise up when you let go of it. In this case, if you're to let go of the handle, it falls back down to just a little bit of brake set. That's about the right amount of tension. If the brake handle were to come up when you let go of it, that means those springs are too tight and it's going to tend to kick on you more. If they were too loose and it would fall down rapidly when you let go of it, that's an indication of them being too loose and therefore the brake's dragging as you're trying to freewheel down. One of the common issues we see with rigs is the adjustment of an operator's brake handle for the height of different operators. The only way to adjust brake handle height is on the brake handle itself, and that is with these two bolts right here. You remove this bolt, loosen this bolt, reposition the handle where it's comfortable to the operator, then reinstall the bolts. Changing operator brake handle height by any other means, whether it's by use of the turnbuckles or any other adjustment, is going to throw your brakes out of adjustment and cause you problems. So ensure that the only way you adjust brake handle height is by the brake handle quadrant right here. On certain rigs, the rod that connects the drawworks to the brake handle, which is this rod that runs right here, it's under the deck on a Taylor. Some rigs it's over the deck. On some rigs that rod is adjustable. We have seen operators from time to time use that rod to adjust the brake handle height or to try to adjust the brakes in some other way. That rod should only be adjusted once a year, and typically during a refurb or some other type of major service. That rod is to ensure that this bell crank and the bell crank in the drawworks remain parallel and working at the same angle at all times. If you adjust that rod and take those bell cranks away from being parallel, it's going to negatively impact the way your brakes perform. So on a rig, if you've checked all the brake adjustment and you know all of the adjustments right, but the rig still is not braking like it should, check this alignment as a last check. Again, the angle of this bell crank should be parallel to the angle of the bell crank inside the drawworks. If that needs adjusted, I would recommend having a rig mechanic come out and make that adjustment to make sure it's correct. So we just walked through brake band adjustment on a normal rig, and I wanted to better illustrate the adjustment on a drawworks. This is a drawworks, this is actually a Cooper drawworks, similar to a Taylor in the way you adjust the linkage and the bell cranks. But I wanted to go through it more open so it's easier to see what we're trying to teach. So again, this equalizer and equalizer bell cranks, the tops of these with the brakes locked need to be level across. This drawworks is just setting on the floor so the brakes aren't set, but if you were to set the brakes, you could see that this angle is different than this. So these are slightly out of adjustment, and you would need to adjust either the right or the left turnbuckle, whichever is appropriate, to bring these back to a level position. Once you have that in adjustment, then you would want to use your go no-go gauge between the brake band and the bell crank to ensure that it fits in here properly. If it doesn't fit in here the way it should, then make simultaneous adjustments on the left and the right bell crank, a quarter turn of it at a time, until that tool fits in there the way you want. Now, as I said, this is a Cooper drawworks. Cooper has a tool just like the Taylor does for spacing in there. You can also check your manual to find out exactly what the proper measurement is supposed to be. Again, I know some people after time, they say, oh, I just know what that measurement's supposed to be, and they go with it. I'd really rather prefer knowing what the factory setting is supposed to be, and even better, using the factory tool. Also in this drawworks, the brake band retainers are slightly different than on the Taylor. The Taylor had the adjustable arm with the roller bearing. In the case of the Coopers, they have adjustable pins. The adjustment is essentially the same. With the brake bands set, or the brake set, you would adjust these pins till you get about a 3/16 inch spacing between the head of the pin and the band of the drawworks. Once that spacing's set, then set the lock nut and check the springs the same way we talked about with the Taylors. So we hope this segment has helped better understand how to make sure brakes are properly adjusted. If you have any problems with what you've learned here today, we encourage you to call us at the factory at Taylor, call any of your service people. We'll be glad to walk you through this step by step.